Good morning, everybody. Here we are. Another wonderful opportunity we have to get into God's Word and get our dose of it and get our day kicked off. This morning I want to talk about tongue speaking. There's a lot of groups out there in modern day Christianity that hold and believe and practice the idea of speaking in tongues, because Paul spoke of such in 1 Corinthians the 14th chapter, and chapter 12, 13, and 14, Paul talks about these gifts and in different perspectives. And so there's those out there in the religious world think that tongue speaking is still alive and well and going on. But here's the problem with that, is those that speak in tongues, they have no idea what they're talking about. And then they'll come back and they'll say, well, I'm speaking in an unknown tongue between me and God. Why would God need you to speak in an unknown tongue? He already knows the hearts and the minds of folks. What is the rationale? What is the reason for that to take place? Let's notice something. Let's go back to the Bible. I know such things have been taught for generations now, but let's go back to the Bible. What did Paul say about tongues, their clarity, their meaning, their purpose? And if we don't understand them, what should we do? Let's find out what the apostle said. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, and let's start in verse 7. Paul says, even things without life, whether flute or a harp, when they make a sound, unless they make a distinction in the sounds, how will it be known what is piped or played? For if the trumpet makes an uncertain sound, who will prepare for battle? So likewise you, unless you utter by the tongue words easy to understand, how will it be known what is spoken? For you will be speaking into the air. There are, it may be, so many kinds of languages in the world, and none of them is without significance or meaning. Therefore, if I do not know the meaning of the language, I shall be a foreigner to him who speaks, and he who speaks will be a foreigner to me. Even so you, since you are zealous for spiritual gifts, let it be for the edification of the church that you seek to excel. Therefore let him who speaks in a tongue pray that he may interpret. For if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays, but my understanding is unfruitful. Here's a very simple point that Paul is making here. It's not hard to understand. It's very simple. But it is greatly overlooked because we want something to be true. We want tongue speaking to be true, as if I've got some special gift. I'm special from God, and so He's endowed me with this wonderful gift of having this special gift of speaking in tongues. But what was the purpose for it? Is God think you're more special than somebody else, so He's given you this ability to speak in tongues without the benefit of anyone else? Again, what did the apostle say? Let's notice this. Verse 7, he uses things of this world, harps and strings. He said that they all make a distinct sound. They all have notes. When a trumpet, and he goes on and said, when someone blows the trumpet, if they don't understand the battle cry, they're not going to be praying. They're not going to be ready for the battle. So the point being is, to be understood. The guy can be out there blowing a bugle or beating on a drum or whatever it is, but if there's not an understanding of the meaning of what's going on, what he's trying to put forth, it's irrelevant. Nobody understands what it is that is trying to inform the people of. Tongue speaking is the same way. Paul, this is in here for a reason, and Paul gives this very simple illustration. Even bugles and harps and flutes, they all have a meaning to the notes, to be understood. And he goes on, and he says, and he uses the parallel in verse 9. He says, same reason. If you're speaking in a language that nobody understands, what good is that? Is it just simply, look at me? Look how special I am. Look what God has done for me. What purpose does it? It'd be like the guy blowing on the bugle for no reason whatsoever. It'd be like, look at me, I'm blowing a bugle, or I'm beating on a drum, or what have you. He says in verse 10, he said there's a lot of languages in the world. Somebody said, well, I'm speaking in the tongue of angels. No, he's not talking about that. He's talking about in the world, this world that we're living in right now. And he says they're all with significance or with meaning. It's like when someone starts speaking in Spanish, you know that, or French, or Russian, or whatever, right? Chinese, Japanese. That's the point that Paul's making here. Every language has a meaning, has a significance. In other words, you can understand that's a certain language that's within the realm of mankind. Now he goes on in verse 11. He makes this point. He goes about the meaning. He said, if I don't know the meaning, so the language, the tongue, is meant to be understood. So whoever was speaking in a tongue back in the first century and the early church, when they spoke in a tongue, it wasn't for the benefit of themselves. It should have been to impart meaning and understanding to someone in order to be taught the gospel. It wasn't a show. It wasn't a look at me type of thing. He says also, he says in verse 12, he says, you need to do it to edify the church. Tongue speaking was meant to edify the church, not as some sign as the Spirit is among us. Go back to the text. It's about imparting information to someone else. For he goes on to say in verse 13, let him who speaks in a tongue pray that he may interpret. It's not all about you. And so much that we see in the religious world about tongue speaking, it's all about them because nobody has any idea what anybody's saying. So it's about them. It's a show. Paul, on the other hand, we go back to the Bible. He said, look, if you don't understand what you're saying in this unknown tongue, you need to pray that you can interpret. Why? To give that information to people that you're talking to. And he says, as he says in verse 14, for if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays, but my understanding is unfruit. You see, it's about understanding. Tongues were for the ability to speak to foreigners in a language that you did not know in order to teach them the gospel. It was not, as it is put forth today, as a sign of the Spirit being in the church. That was never the reason, as it is used today. It was always as a medium to speak to someone that did not speak your language, to impart and to teach the gospel to them. It was meant to understand. It was meant to be understood according to the apostle. There's your dose of God's word today. I encourage you to go back and look at what Paul actually says about tongue speaking and these gifts and compare them to how they're actually used today. But anyway, that's 1 Corinthians chapter 14. Lord willing, tomorrow we'll get back. We'll get us another dose of God's word. And until then, I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.